10 years ago, my son tragically died in a yacht explosion. But at 4:07 this morning, he called and told me to come pick him up. I jolted awake in terror, a chill running through my body, my heart pounding wildly. I was torn between fear and hope. Was this a miracle or some terrifying omen? Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, sit back comfortably, and remember, the people in these stories always had every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. My name is Lester Harrington. I run a $200 million shipping empire. My entire life has been tied to ship decks and distant voyages. I was accustomed to steering my corporate vessel through brutal financial storms. I always took pride in being a maritime strategist with a cool head. I knew how to read an opponent's psychological manifest. But there was one dark sea where I was completely lost. That was the pain of losing a loved one. 10 years ago, the yacht carrying my eldest son caught fire off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The Coast Guard found only charred debris drifting on the water. My wife died 2 years later from a broken heart. The Harrington family ship became a deserted ghost vessel. I thought I would spend the rest of my life sailing alone toward the sunset. But the phone call at 4:07 this morning shattered that fragile peace. The ring of my secure phone tore through the cold darkness. On the other end was a hoarse voice distorted by the static of the sea. That voice told me to come to Pier Number 7 and pick him up. The blood in my veins froze instantly. Pier Number 7 was the corporation's old harbor, abandoned long ago. During the 15-minute drive through the thick fog, my heart pounded like the engine of an old ship on the verge of exploding. The silence around me was suffocating. I was afraid, hopeful, and suspicious all at once. When the headlights of my Bentley swept across rows of rusted shipping containers, I saw a figure standing hunched in the rain. The man lifted his head. The headlights illuminated the faint scars on his face. But those eyes, that forehead, and that build were unmistakable. It was Soren. He threw himself into my arms and burst into tears. His body shook violently beneath his rain-soaked clothes. My cold, analytical mind was completely paralyzed by the burning tears of a father. All I could do was hold him tightly. My son, whom I had believed dead, had returned. But that emotional moment lasted no more than 30 seconds. The instant our bodies touched, the instincts of a man born from the sea detected the scent of a horrifying deception. The Harrington family ship was once again on a collision course with an iceberg. This time the saboteurs were people who shared my bloodline. The weaponization of a face had been activated. A deadly game of wits had officially begun. When you embrace someone you buried in your mind 10 years ago, every one of your senses automatically goes on high alert. I tightened my grip around the shoulders of the man claiming to be my son. He was much thinner than before. The smell of sweat on him mixed with the strong scent of sea salt. He cried convincingly. His choking sobs came at exactly the rhythm of someone who had just returned from the dead. Anyone watching would have been moved to tears. But when I let him go, my hand resting on the back of his damp jacket, I waited for something. I waited for a familiar gesture from the past. I waited for 3 gentle pats on my left shoulder. It was not an ordinary habit. It was a private ritual known only to us. It was a silent code between me and the real Soren since he was a 10-year-old boy afraid of the dark. Every time I returned from a voyage or before stepping into a tense boardroom meeting, the two of us would hug and lightly pat each other 3 times on the back. It was a signal that meant the ship had reached port safely. The man standing before me remained completely still. His arms either hung loosely at his sides or clung to me in a chaotic embrace. He had no idea that those 3 secret pats even existed. There was a half-second pause in my thoughts. Outsiders would think I was a confused old father. They would believe my emotions had clouded my judgment and that I was ready to believe in any miracle. But no, Lester Harrington had never been confused on the deck of his own ship. In that instant, I quickly put on the mask of a grieving father. The mind of a maritime strategist began operating at full capacity. I looked into his tear-filled eyes. I noticed a very slight discrepancy in the distance between his pupils compared to the photographs of Soren that I studied every night. This man was a talented actor. He had been professionally trained and bore a 99% resemblance to Soren thanks to cutting-edge plastic surgery. He was using my son's face as a weapon aimed at my only weakness. I gently patted his shoulder and gave him a sorrowful smile. "Let's go home, son. Come home with your father." I needed to play the role of a frail old man. Because when your enemy believes your deck is unmanned, that is when they reveal every weakness in their psychological manifest. I helped my son into the car, but one suffocating question was already rising in my mind. The next morning, I instructed the butler to prepare a special breakfast in the main dining room. I wanted to test a microscopic biological trap that no imposter could possibly anticipate. On the table sat a plate of smoked chorizo pastries and a bottle of Cholula hot sauce. The real Soren had a congenital allergy to a specific type of corn used in the ingredients of Cholula hot sauce. It was a family medical secret that had never been disclosed to anyone outside the family. The man sitting across from me wore one of Soren's old sweaters. He casually picked up the hot sauce bottle and poured a generous amount over his food. As he ate, he told me a dramatic story. He claimed he had been kidnapped and imprisoned on a deserted island somewhere in the Caribbean for the past 10 years as a labor slave. He described escaping aboard a cargo ship. His story flowed smoothly, and his voice carried all the bitterness and pain one would expect. But I was not watching his mouth. My eyes were fixed beneath the table where an old dog named Anchor was lying. Anchor was a 14-year-old Labrador. He was blind in one eye and moved with a slow, stiff gait. He had been the real Soren's most loyal companion since childhood. A dog's hearing and sense of smell are the most accurate biological DNA screening tools in existence beyond the capabilities of any laboratory. I heard the faint scratching of Anchor's nails against the oak floor. He slowly crawled out from beneath the table and approached the man. I held my breath, watching every tiny movement. If that had been Soren, Anchor would have wagged his tail with joy. He would have whimpered and rubbed his head against the man's knee, just as he had done 10 years ago. But he did not. Anchor stopped about 2 meters from the man's feet. He froze completely. His ears flattened. His nose tested the air with obvious caution. Then a low, broken growl emerged from deep within his throat. The man glanced at the dog, momentarily confused. He reached out as if to pet him and called his name. The dog immediately backed away, bared his teeth, and walked straight to the corner of the room. The man sat there calmly, eating food that could have killed the real Soren. He was rejected by the very animal that had once been closest to my son. I took a sip of cold Earl Grey tea to suppress my anger. I could feel my fury building like a powerful undercurrent beneath the ocean floor. Who had directed this performance? Who possessed enough money and enough knowledge of my family's medical history to create a ghost designed to steal my empire? The answer was about to reveal itself. A moment later, the sharp clicking of high heels echoed from outside the doorway, accompanied by a familiar smile that carried the promise of death. The sharp clicking of high heels on the floor grew closer and closer. Bettina, my youngest daughter, walked into the dining room. She served as the chief financial officer of the Harrington Group. Behind her came Lyle Thornton, her husband. He was an auditing specialist with eyes as sharp as a surgical blade. The moment she saw the man sitting at the breakfast table, Bettina dropped her designer handbag onto the floor. Her lips trembled violently. Tears immediately flooded her eyes. She rushed forward, threw her arms around the man, and cried out through her sobs, "Soren! Oh my God, are you really alive?" It was an incredibly moving display of family affection. A sister reunited with the brother she had believed dead for 10 years. But as a maritime strategist who had spent a lifetime reading people, I never focused on the whole picture. I focused on the microscopic details. When Bettina first saw the man, there was a precise delay of 0.3 seconds between her expression of shock and the first tear that fell. In behavioral psychology, a genuine emotional reaction never follows such a logical delay. It is the result of deliberate facial muscle activation. Furthermore, when she embraced him, both of her arms tightened around his back, but her thumbs lightly tapped his shoulder twice. That was a control signal, not the desperate embrace of a loving sister. I turned my attention to Lyle, my son-in-law. He stood silently in the doorway with his arms crossed. There was no surprise in his eyes. It was the look of an auditor inspecting an asset that had just been successfully delivered. He was watching my reaction far more closely than he was looking at the brother-in-law who had supposedly returned from the dead. What do you think about Bettina's reaction? Leave a comment with 2 if you believe she was genuinely emotional, or 3 if you think she was a talented actress. The deception in that room was so thick I could smell it more clearly than the scent of the sea itself. Bettina, the daughter I had raised with my own hands, the woman I had trusted with the keys to the financial vault of my corporation, was performing a carefully crafted play with a complete stranger in order to deceive her own father. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest, the kind of pain that carried memories of my late wife. The family ship was being hollowed out from within by its own closest sailors. I buried that pain deep inside and let out a soft cough. My breathing carried the faint wheeze of a broken old man. I told them to begin the procedures necessary to restore Soren's position within the corporation. I caught a flash of greed crossing Lyle's eyes. They thought they had won, but they had no idea that later that very night I would break into the fortress of confidential data and uncover a horrifying truth far beyond all of these lies. That night, after the entire mansion had fallen into a deep sleep, I remained awake. I put on a heavy coat and descended into the depths of the basement. This was where the Harrington Group's secure data fortress was located. Accompanying me was Russell, the head of information security. He was the only loyal comrade I had left from my days sailing aboard cargo ships. The server room was freezing cold and filled with an eerie blue neon glow. The constant hum of cooling fans created a suffocating atmosphere. This was where the entire digital history of our family and corporation was stored. I stood silently in the darkness. I watched Russell's fingers fly across the keyboard. I wanted to know how long Bettina had been preparing for this fraudulent return. I wanted to know when my ship had first begun taking on water. "Mr. Harrington, the results of the digital audit are in," Russell said. His voice was as cold as the numbers displayed across the large monitor. "Over the past 15 months, Miss Bettina's internal account accessed your confidential inheritance files and trust provisions a total of 47 times. Every access occurred between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. 47 times. 47 timestamps of betrayal permanently recorded in unforgiving lines of code. Each timestamp felt like a knife driven straight into my back. My daughter had secretly studied every legal loophole hidden within my estate plan. She had searched for a way to transfer the majority of the company's shares to a deceased heir, if that heir were to suddenly return. She had assembled a perfect psychological profile. She had calculated the exact moment when I would be most vulnerable, and then played the counterfeit Soren card. The pain I felt at that moment was beyond comparison. It was not merely the pain of betrayal. It was the pain of self-reproach. I had been the one who taught Bettina how to manage a corporation. I taught her how to analyze data and identify an opponent's weaknesses before delivering a decisive strike. I had forged her into a brilliant maritime strategist, and now she was using those very skills to overthrow the father who had given her everything. The blue glow of the monitors reflected across my aging face. I stared at the list of copied files. Soren's blood type information, his medical records, audio recordings of his voice from his teenage years. All of it had been stolen. Bettina had sold every memory of her brother to a hidden power operating in the shadows. I clenched my fists. Beside my feet, Anchor lightly tapped his claws against the floor as if reminding me of something. I looked at Russell and ordered him to activate Operation Reverse Current. I wanted to know who the imposter really was. But the instant Russell initiated the advanced search protocol, a satellite tracking record from the waters of the Bahamas appeared on the screen. Both of us froze in stunned silence. The information before us was so shocking that for several long seconds neither of us could speak a single word. The computer screens flickered continuously inside the freezing server room. Russell's fingers flew across the keyboard as he worked to decrypt the location data that had suddenly appeared. 3 days after that nighttime investigation, Russell brought me a brown envelope sealed with wax. Inside were the DNA test results obtained secretly from strands of hair the imposter had left behind on a pillow. We compared them against Sauron's blood samples stored at the Central Hospital 10 years earlier. I opened the envelope beneath the light of my desk lamp. My hands did not tremble. My mind had already prepared itself for the worst. The result came as no surprise to a strategist. The match percentage was 0. The man living in my house was a complete stranger. His real name was Thane Prescott. He was a former stage actor with a criminal history involving financial fraud. He had vanished from public records 2 years earlier. He had undergone 3 facial bone reconstruction surgeries at an illegal clinic somewhere in Eastern Europe to acquire his current appearance. They had sculpted a perfect ghost, but it was the next line in Russell's report that nearly stopped my heart. Bad news. The man in my house was not Soren. Good news. The real Sauron had never died. Russell slid another document toward me, a satellite photograph captured just 24 hours earlier. The image showed a small, isolated farm on the outskirts of Nassau in the Bahamas. Standing near the shoreline repairing a fishing net was a man with a large burn scar running down his left arm. Time and hardship had altered his face. Storms and suffering had left their marks. But that posture, that habit of tilting his head toward the horizon, it could be no one else. It was my son. 10 years ago, the yacht explosion had been real, but Soren had somehow survived and drifted ashore. Bettina and her associates had discovered that he was alive in the Bahamas. Yet, instead of bringing their brother home, they chose a far crueler path. They secretly concealed his existence and kept him trapped through money, threats, or both. Then they hired Thane Prescott to impersonate him. An imposter would be easier to control. If the real Soren returned, he would never sign the predatory corporate agreements they had already prepared. They did not need a true heir. They needed a puppet. I leaned back in my chair and released a long breath. A powerful current seemed to surge back through my veins. My son was alive. That was all a father needed to know before beginning the most ruthless hunt of his life. I stared at the satellite photograph and noticed another terrifying detail. The people holding Soren captive in the Bahamas were not acting under my daughter's orders alone. The name of the true mastermind emerged through a Cayman Islands bank account used to transfer the payments. And the moment I read that name, I realized that a blood feud from 15 years ago had returned to finish what it started. The name belonged to a man I thought had disappeared forever. A man whose empire I had destroyed during a brutal shipping war years earlier. A man who had sworn standing across a courtroom from me that one day he would take everything I loved. Now at last he had made his move. If you think my daughter hiring someone to impersonate my son was the worst part of this story, wait until you learn the true identity of her husband. After discovering that Soren was still alive, I ordered Russell to dig deeper into the background of Lyle Thornton, my perfect quiet son-in-law. For 7 years he had been present at every major financial decision within the Harrington Group. What we uncovered exposed a dark conspiracy. It was a ruthless revenge plan that had begun in the previous generation. Lyle Thornton was not his original name. His real name was Lyle Carson. He was the only son of Gerald Carson, my greatest rival in the shipping industry 15 years ago. Back then I defeated Gerald in the marketplace. His company collapsed completely. Driven to despair, Gerald took his own life in a rundown hotel room. Lyle changed his identity to conceal his origins. He approached Bettina during their university years. He pretended to be a loving, warm-hearted man in order to gain entry into the Harrington family. He was a venomous snake that had patiently infiltrated our lives for 7 years. He waited for the perfect opportunity to destroy my empire and avenge his father. The confidential financial reports Russell recovered from Lyle's computer revealed a horrifying figure. $18.3 million had been secretly siphoned away through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. But that was not the snake's final objective. Lyle and Bettina were preparing to pressure me into signing away the rights to a new technology developed by the Harrington Group. It was an AI navigation system worth tens of millions of dollars. They intended to sell it to a foreign partner for a fraction of its value. The consequences would have been catastrophic. The company's stock value would collapse by 80%. The corporation would be pushed to the edge of bankruptcy almost overnight. The cruelty of Lyle and the blindness of Bettina left me struggling to breathe. For love and greed, my daughter had sacrificed her entire family to a monster. Their calculations were meticulous. The appearance of the fake Soren would overwhelm me emotionally. I would be willing to sign any document placed before me in order to make up for my lost son. Afterward, I would conveniently die from a carefully orchestrated heart attack. I stared at the wedding photograph of Bettina and Lyle sitting on my desk. My hands trembled with rage. You want to stage a mutiny aboard my ship? Then let me show you what a true captain's storm looks like. If you've made it this far, then perhaps you're enjoying the story. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and make your prediction about how the story will end. Let's see if you can guess correctly. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. I rose from my chair and walked out of my office. The clock struck midnight. I knew it was time to break one of the critical links in their plan. I headed straight toward the bedroom of the imposter Thane Prescott. It was time to tear away his mask. But the moment my hand touched the doorknob, I heard a terrified whisper through the crack in the door. Thane was pleading with someone over the phone to spare his life. The person on the other end of the call was Lyle, and Lyle had just given orders for a hired killer to eliminate Thane immediately after tomorrow. I pushed the door open and stepped into Thane Prescott's room. His secretive whispering stopped instantly. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. I had come alone without any bodyguards. In my hands were 2 glasses of premium scotch. I casually placed one in front of him and sat down in the chair across from him. He looked at me and tried to force the warm smile of a devoted son onto his face. "Dad, it's late. Why aren't you asleep?" Yet I said nothing. Instead, I slid the envelope containing the DNA test results and the file bearing his real identity across the table. I stared directly into his eyes with the cold, deadly calm of a captain confronting a mutineer. I saw his pupils contract within 0.2 of a second. He opened his mouth as if to explain, but I raised one finger and cut him off. "Thane, the current has changed direction, and there is no escape route from this harbor for you. I know about the call you just received from Lyle Carson. He has already prepared a dose of poison for you. The moment I sign the inheritance agreement tomorrow, you'll die in what will be ruled a drunk driving accident. Every crime connected to this fraud will be blamed on your lifeless body. Do you really think Gerald Carson's son intends to give you the remaining $500,000? You're nothing more than a disposable pawn on their board." Thane stared at me as beads of cold sweat began forming across his forehead. He knew a maritime strategist like me never made idle threats. His ragged breathing filled the silent room. The fear of death shattered the actor's mask completely. He collapsed onto his knees and clutched my legs, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mr. Harrington, please save me. I was forced into this. Lyle and Miss Bettina hired me for $2 million to play this role. They gave me every detail about Soren. They have a USB drive containing all the training recordings, the voice coaching files, and the records of my plastic surgeries in Budapest. I'll give it to you. Please save my life." Thane Prescott scrambled toward a suitcase and ripped open a hidden compartment inside the lining. From it, he retrieved a small black USB drive. His hands shook violently as he presented it to me. I took the cold device from him. Thane was not the greatest villain in this story. He was merely a pawn trapped between the madness and ambition of my own children. I stood up and instructed him to continue playing his role perfectly the next morning. But as I stepped out of the room, I noticed a dark figure lurking at the far end of the hallway. The man held something metallic in his hand. The polished surface caught a flash of light, and it was pointed directly toward my bedroom door. The shadowy figure in the hallway was silently subdued by Russell within moments. My plan to secure the deck of my ship was complete. The following morning, December 15th, the decisive board of directors meeting officially began. The conference room on the 36th floor was flooded with sunlight, yet the atmosphere inside felt as suffocating as the air before a violent storm at sea. Every major shareholder was present. Bettina sat at the center of the table. Beside her was Lyle, whose face revealed a barely concealed sense of triumph. Standing behind them was Thane Prescott, dressed in an elegant suit, his eyes fixed on the floor as he struggled to hide his fear. Bettina pushed the inheritance agreement and the $18 million AI technology transfer contract toward me. Her voice was firm. "Dad, Soren has returned, and the board needs structural stability. Signing these documents will ensure that the future of the Harrington Group does not fall into the hands of outsiders. Please sign them." I picked up the pen and stared at the signature line. I could hear Lyle's breathing quicken beside me. He was counting every second, waiting to witness the downfall of the man who had bankrupted his father. I set the pen down without signing. Then I looked up and smiled coldly into Lyle's eyes. "Lyle, do you know the first rule of a captain facing a storm? It is never to allow a venomous snake onto his deck." The room immediately erupted into whispers. Bettina's face turned pale. "Dad, what are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?" "I haven't lost my mind, Bettina." "But you have." My voice echoed through the room as I signaled to Russell. The massive display screen immediately came to life. Audio and video recordings from Thane Prescott's USB drive exploded across the room. They exposed the entire process of Lyle training Thane to impersonate Sauron. Wire transfers from Lyle's secret accounts to the plastic surgery clinic in Budapest appeared in crystal clear detail. And Russell was not finished. He proceeded to display the records of Bettina's 47 unauthorized accesses to confidential inheritance files, followed by evidence of the $18.3 million embezzlement carried out by Lyle Carson, the son of Gerald Carson. Lyle shot to his feet, his face twisted with rage and panic. This is slander. You have no legal proof. You want legal proof, Lyle. My voice rang through the room like thunder. At this very moment, the conference room doors are opening. The massive mahogany double doors slowly swung apart. A man stepped inside. He wore a simple black suit. A large burn scar was visible along his left arm. His stride was steady and confident. His face carried the marks of years spent battling the ocean and surviving hardship. But those eyes, no one in that room could mistake them. It was the real Soren Harrington. Soren walked directly toward the conference table. He passed by the trembling Thane Prescott without even glancing at him. Then he stopped in front of me. He said nothing. Instead, he leaned forward and embraced my aging shoulders. With his rough, weathered hand, he gently patted my back 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Tears flooded my eyes. "Dad," he whispered. "I'm home. The ship has reached port safely." Lyle Carson collapsed back into his chair. His face turned gray as ash. At that exact moment, 4 FBI agents entered the conference room carrying emergency arrest warrants. The cold steel handcuffs snapped around Lyle's wrists. But then something unexpected happened. Lyle suddenly burst into manic laughter. He stared directly at Bettina. Then he shouted a single question that sent the entire room into frozen silence once again. "Bettina, have you still not told your father who actually ordered the explosion 10 years ago?" Lyle Carson's maniacal scream was silenced the moment the police car door slammed shut. The venomous snake paid the price with a 20-year prison sentence. The entire $18.3 million he had embezzled was recovered. The imposter Thane Prescott received a suspended sentence thanks to his full cooperation and his decision to surrender the critical evidence. He was permanently banned from the entertainment industry. Once the storm of deception had passed, the ocean did what it always does. It returned to its natural state of calm. I walked into my old office and found Bettina sitting alone, crying until she had no tears left. My daughter had signed her resignation from every position she held, leaving in disgrace. But Soren walked over to his sister. He looked at the sibling who had betrayed him with the compassion of a man who had crossed the boundary between life and death. Soren placed a hand on Bettina's shoulder and spoke softly. "Family is the only ship we truly have. We cannot abandon one another before the ship has sunk." I stood at a distance watching my 2 children and smiled with a sense of relief I had not felt in years. I decided to establish the Francis Harrington Charitable Foundation in honor of my late wife. Every share confiscated from Lyle was transferred into the foundation to help people who had lost their way in life. The story of the Harrington family carries a lesson for all of us. Money and power may be able to purchase a false face, but they can never buy the 3 gentle pats that symbolize genuine family love. Never allow greed to blind you or drive you to betray the people who love you most. Remember that on the ship of life, loyalty and integrity are the most reliable compass you will ever possess. They are what guide you safely through every storm. Thank you for staying with us through this entire story. Justice is always served. We invite you to join our community by liking and subscribing to enjoy more gripping, realistic stories about family, human nature, and life's unexpected journeys. And as always, thank you for being part of this space.